So again, I'm going to use my internal compass. Where you have marks for the edges of the pages, don't put marker down there because you're going to cut these out. I don't cut it out till the very end. Why cut it if you're not sure if you've done a good job on the drawing of it? If you want to cut it out, fine. But I usually wait. Cutting for me is no problem. For some of you guys, cutting is a real problem. Now I'm going to use my Pigmamicron to start filling in, or outlining rather, the edges of the strokes of the lines. Okay, so there's one. Here's the tail. And this is really nice. This is really nice marker because it does not, the Bristol is it's an absorbent product. It's not shiny and smooth, so it absorbs the ink. But what you don't want the ink to do is you don't want it to spread when it hits the paper. Now, what a Sharpie will do, let me grab a Sharpie. It will spread. Let me grab one of these. I'll get a fine tip Sharpie. And I'll also get this Prismacolor Premium permanent marker. I used this to make the first draft. Tracing paper doesn't bleed, so I can use things like Sharpie and this, but this can bleed or spread. Now, I'm going to use the fine tip on the Prismacolor marker, and I want to show you the difference between a Pigmamicron stroke and a stroke of a marker such as the Prismacolor marker. Okay, so I'm going to carefully do the same kind of activity here, outlining. Now it does look darker because, well, it's bleeding. So let me show you up close the difference in the quality. Okay, the Pigmamicron quality is actually much better. The Prismacolor, it has, the edges tend to flare out, bleed. Now that's not the end of the world, but usually, I mean, I was trained a little old school, so pardon me for being, a perfectionist, because that's exactly what we were taught to be, and it's still expected. Perfection is, I mean, it's not achievable technically, but perfection is absolutely, or trying to achieve it is super important. You don't see Nike's logo looking all crappy on the edges. Okay, now I'm going to use a Sharpie, and I'm going to see how it reacts to the Bristol. Okay, now it kind of has almost like a, I don't know, it kind of drags a little bit, so it kind of almost has a stepping kind of thing going on. So let me show you the quality of it. And you know what, I'm going to continue to draw with a Pigmamicron right next to it, or I'll hook up to it, and we'll see if we can notice a difference. We'll definitely notice a difference where the two come together. Okay, so Sharpie tends to have this kind of not a very smooth drag. Okay, Pigmamicron has a really smooth drag, so you can really see the difference. Pigmamicron, smooth drag. Sharpie, bit of a rough drag. Prismacolor permanent marker bleeds a lot. So this is why I have chosen to use the Pigmamicron. I also know that the Faber-Castell, this manufacturer, the PITT artist pens, these are comparable to, they're comparable to these Pigmamicron. Okay, so I'm going to continue my demonstration with the Pigmamicron because it's the better art supply. Why would I use something lesser? No point. Now, if you are having a hard time drawing straight lines, you may use a ruler. If you have a hard time drawing curves, there is a great thing out there called a bendable French curve, and so those are really, really handy. I had a friend, Joe Summers, nicest guy when we were in high school, and he and I had art classes together, by a guy named Mr. Schultz, best art teacher ever. And Joe's hand, even though he was only 16 or 17 years old, it used to shake really bad. So he probably couldn't have gotten as smooth a line out of his attempt as what I'm getting here. And some of you may have the same kind of thing going on, where you're shaky, and it's just part of who you are. No big deal. If that's the case, then you need to figure out what tools you need to use and take advantage of to overcome things. Don't make something an excuse. Make it a reason. A reason to be successful, a reason to overcome. I'm dyslexic, and sometimes I really say crazy things and I write crazy things down. But, as a designer, sometimes looking at the world differently in the eyes and mind of somebody who's dyslexic, you think of it differently, and so solutions to problems oftentimes are different than what other people might think of, and more creative. So use your disadvantages to your advantage. Okay, so I'm just outlining this. I'll fill it in later. I like to fill it in with the Sharpie because, quite frankly, it just goes quicker, as long as I'm very careful about the edges of my work. Oh, I wanted to draw that all the way there and here. It's funny because when I'm doing my finished drafts, I oftentimes continue to make changes in certain little things that I may not have done on the first draft. So this is the final draft. Like this was probably connected, and I decided to taper it. Now, my line that I'm using, my line is based off of studying other line. Like when somebody uses a paintbrush and they dip it into black ink, and they just kind of freestyle, almost like Japanese calligraphy in a way, but they quickly brush something out, and you have that when your brush is pressed harder, you know how it tends to spread out, and it will create a thicker line. Well, that's kind of my inspiration for my line. You'll notice it goes from thick to thin, and sometimes back to thick again. But I like the idea of having this fluid line and having a little bit of contrast in my line. Okay, so here is the outline of my line, and now I'm ready to fill it in. Now again, you want to make sure, gosh, my hand is so dirty right here, but you really want to make sure your hands are clean before you do this. You don't want to be putting your hand all over it because then you start putting little handprints everywhere. But again, having this piece of paper is really a smart thing, smart way to manage this. Now here's where I will grab my Sharpie, medium size, or even the end of the Prismacolor. Actually, I might just go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to carefully go in here, and it's just like this is kind of go. I know it seems weird. We're talking about the alphabet, the ABCs, and now we're talking about coloring in lines. But this does kind of go back to grade school, kindergarten, preschool, whatever. Here's where you need to be very careful to stay in the lines. You want your edges you don't want this to bleed out. So just barely tap when you're drawing, and pulling. Just tap the edge of that line that you drew initially. Don't go over it. Just get right to the edge of it. That Pigmamicron line. Now I'm also going to try Sharpie, and I'm going to see if there's much of a difference between the Prismacolor permanent marker. One thing is they both stink. They both smell bad. They both smell like art supplies. Make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. Please don't sniff these art supplies. This isn't about huffing. It's about creating art. So don't go huffing this stuff. And I'm not there to stop you if you do, but please don't. And yes, I'm trying to be funny, but yet serious. So here we go. I'm almost done with that wing. Now, that wing looks not too bad. I'm not sure I really enjoy this pointy thing going on here, so I'm just going to curve that in. I don't like how that's flaring out or how it's kind of bleeding. I might grab my Pigma Micron and kind of sharpen that up a little bit. There we go. And I'm ready to move on to another area. Now, I'm going to try and test out this Sharpie. So this was Prismacolor over here. I want to make sure that's solid too. There's a little bit grayness in there, so make sure you're working with new, fresh supplies. Now the Sharpie, it's very bleedy as well, so I have to be very careful to stay right on that line. And definitely fill in every part of this. I don't want to see a bunch of little white bits where you were just being sloppy. So take your time. I've had students just rush through this process, and you know, you get what you put into it. I don't give grades, you earn them. So if you're planning on just rushing through this and thinking you can finish this in 5 minutes and have it look good, you got another thing coming. And in your grade really reflects it too. So please take your time, put in effort, pretend you're working for a client. I mean, you wouldn't just rush through something for a client and give them some garbage. So take your time. Take your time and don't rush. When you rush through stuff, especially when you're new to stuff, new to this, it just ends up looking rushed and it just looks bad. Why waste your time and money? I mean, these supplies cost you money, and why waste all that money on something that just is garbage? Okay, so don't waste your money in rushing through something and having it look bad. So I'm really careful about what I'm doing here and filling in these lines. You know, actually the Sharpie I think is working a little bit better than the Prismacolor. So that's going to be my tool of choice for filling in the lines. I suppose you could do this whole entire thing in Sharpie. You know, the really thin tip Sharpie and then this Sharpie. Your line on the edge just won't be quite as sharp, ironically speaking, because it's a Sharpie. But it'll still look pretty good. Okay. Now still you're thinking, I'm sure, why are we doing this by hand? Well, you know, symbols, which eventually evolved into our letters, which, you know, now we have typography. All of that started out by hand. I want you guys to have a healthy respect of where things come from and how it's not really as easy as it seems. When you look at a logo or a symbol, it seems so easy and so natural, and it just fools you, because when you actually start working on symbols and logos, they're very difficult to master and to really make clean. And I start again with the hand, then I go to the computer. Okay, there we go. All right. So here is the finished symbol for my bird. Again, I might analyze this. I'm looking right in here. I'm not sure I care for, again, if you step back from your work, you might see some areas where I'm like, okay, right in here feels a little off. So I might continue to work on that area. But always keep analyzing and looking at the work, stepping back from it, carefully making corrections. Bad thing about this is there's no Command Z or Control Z. It's not like you can just sit there and undo something. So if you really screw it up, just start over. I mean, that's just life. Now the last thing I would do to this is I would cut this down, not using a pair of scissors, but I would use an X-Acto knife. I would cut this down to 8 inch by 8 inch. I would line up my ruler to my little tick marks that I made and cut this out.